Hi there. So in this video I'm going to discuss a few of the points that I have noticed with regard to psychiatry and the false mental health diagnoses that are taking place. So many people often say that, these allegations are just so extreme that there must be some kind of innocent explanation. And this is why it's very important to distinguish between facts and conspiracies and falsehoods. In a context where this crime is not yet publicly known, the term conspiracy theory has emerged. And this has somehow come to suggest that all theories or any suggestion that a crime is taking place is automatically untrue. But that's not what conspiracy theory means. Conspiracy is a word that has been developed in the language to describe that type of situation. A theory is just a theory about one of those conspiracies. So it doesn't automatically mean that if somebody decides to call it, your allegation, a conspiracy theory, that your allegation is automatically untrue, which is what has been seeming to have been going on when these allegations have been made. And they have been rebuffed by the mere assertion that they are a conspiracy theory. That, to me, is simply based on people not paying attention. It doesn't make sense whatsoever. Okay, another point to mention is that it has also been very difficult for us to convey the fact that this crime is going on, and this is perhaps in part because it's difficult for decent people to really understand criminal psychology and deviant psychology, because it's very, very different. And that is, perhaps why it's been difficult for other people to recognise that criminal activity is taking place, and also that criminal activity on this scale of severity is taking place. Because it's so much easier to just drop these allegations into the conspiracy theory basket, which has been quite clearly laid out through the media and through this systematic disconnecting and reconnecting of the concept to mean something completely different. So it's important to remember that serious crime and criminal behaviour does exist. It's existed throughout the history of mankind. And history proves that crimes like this particular one we are talking about do take place, because similar crimes like this have already been exposed. There is a huge amount of evidence available, and this is because so many people are suffering in so many different ways. And maybe the situation might be inconclusive if you just look at one person's case, but when you put all the cases together and you look at the evidence and the entire thing as a whole, which hasn't happened yet, that's when you can get a broader scope of things. And that's when you put together the proven cases of MKUltra and COINTELPRO and the persecution of Falun Gong as well. That's another very important one. But, there is massive evidence, but, you can't say it's a mass delusion without actually reviewing the evidence being put forward by these people. And that's what a lot of people have been suggesting, that it's okay to simply call it a mass delusion without any further ado, and that's automatically suggesting that it is now been decided that it's a mass delusion. These attempts to just basically do away with the allegations put forward by victims just don't make sense by any standard of logic. And that's a very clear telltale sign of deviant psychology. Okay, because deviants don't make sense and they lie and they are compulsive liars to hide their crimes. So they will say whatever they need to at the time to get away with it, but it's only when you go back and you look back and you have a look and you see it doesn't add up, and that's how you know, you found a liar. So one of the ways you know. Okay, it's also crucial to know the nature of modern technology that's taking place as well, and that makes these type of crimes possible. Because again, these allegations by victims have just sort of been dismissed out of hand and said, oh, without anybody without the police conducting a criminal investigation. And that's what's been happening. The police have been just rerouting these allegations into the mental health bin, which has been set up, and they have not investigated it, so they have got no basis upon which to say whether it's true or not. They have just been trying to get away with it. So it's important to not suggest that somebody is crazy for alleging a crime. Another point is, which I'll just skim over for now, is that a lot of material has arisen in the public domain which is suggesting that this is not true, and this is what we have been discovering is wrong with alt media, because we have the mainstream media which plugs away at all the propaganda for the politicians, and then we have the alt media which seems to have emerged in the last couple of years. But then we have some of the alt media spreading misinformation and disinformation, you see. So a lot of the alt media has been discredited as well. But I'm going to discuss in these videos some of the cases where genuine claimants have been deliberately labelled as delusional in the past, precisely so their genuine claims of abuse can be ignored. Okay? And we know this happens as a routine sign of deviant behaviour through the suppression of child sexual abuse victims, where they are labelled mad so their genuine claims can be ignored. And that's the level that deviants will stoop to label a child who's been abused as crazy, as delusional, so as to avoid justice and to avoid protection for those children and children like them. So there are different types of evidence for this crime. There's the individual evidence from the people who are alleging they are victims. That also has to be put together with evidence about the technology, and it comes back, at the very least, we have patents going back to the 1950s for this technology. So all these parts of information have to be put together and computed at the same time, you see. Right, so another point I have had to discuss previously is how the decent law-abiding citizen can notice and spot deliberate and malicious action. And I remember somebody telling me many years ago that they had been a victim of this abuse, and at the time, because they weren't explaining it to me, well, I felt I didn't have enough information. I just couldn't imagine that it could be true. So I started thinking, I wonder if it's something to do with some kind of magnetism in the earth, or where he happens to be living, and or he's particularly sensitive or something to that kind of thing. But I can give you an example. If you try to, for example, switch on your computer but it doesn't work, you may assume your computer is broken, but then you realise that the battery isn't plugged in. In that case, ignorance of or a failure to consider the true cause, the battery not being plugged in, leads us to falsely form a false conclusion, a false explanation of the cause. For example, we thought that it was broken, but we didn't recognise there could be another possibility that the battery was not plugged in. Another example is the person who believes their bank really is doing a security check. They reason to themselves, well, it must be part of their ordinary procedure, or they must be trying to look out for my interests. And then they mistakenly give their details and their financial details to criminals by responding to the email. Here, an innocent explanation is in fact a possibility. It's possible that the bank was doing their ordinary security procedures. But it is the very existence of simultaneous innocent possibilities that cause people to be deceived. Because the innocent person thinks, oh, it must be the innocent way because that's how I would be. But the criminal is the opposite. Another good example of the innocent mind versus the deviant mind is the prank. And I'm a great fan of prank calls or prank videos. And I put one on my website, but I say a fan because, you know, they're usually in good humour, but it's the same sort of principle. When somebody, for example, there's one on my website where somebody is taking a public shower near the beach, and somebody comes up from behind and keeps on pouring more shampoo on their head. The person doesn't realise that more shampoo is being put on their head, and all they know is that they're getting more and more bubbles, and no matter how much they wash their hair, the bubbles are not going away. And it takes this person a very long time, you know, and they go on for this for a while, and they don't realise that somebody's doing it deliberately, and they become so distressed that they end up running a mile from the shower. They fall over, they trip over the fence, they run up the hill, you know, screaming because they don't know what's going on. It's deliberate, you see, and that's what happens in a prank. So some people have suggested that people who allege this crime are delusional. And one of the main, for example, people say, well, I'm being persecuted, or, you know, I'm being persecuted by the Secret Service, you know, these agencies, you know, that's what is happening to us. And, you know, by the network of criminals. But just to say that we are being persecuted doesn't mean automatically that you have a delusion, because yes, in the psychology manual that has been developed by, they suggest that, you know, one of the indications that you have a psychological illness is that you allege you're being persecuted. But we know, just like conspiracy, the word conspiracy, just saying you're persecuted doesn't automatically mean that you're delusional, because we know that persecution is the entire basis of the international asylum process. So we know that people are persecuted in certain circumstances, so it cannot automatically mean something else. It couldn't automatically mean that you have a mental illness. On the contrary, imagining that criminals and serious crime does not exist is woefully and also dangerously naive. So the two can't be equated, and it's very dangerous, and you have to pay attention to those who are trying to equate those two false associations, because that again is a clear indication of deviant psychology and deviant behaviour. Okay, now another point to mention is that organised stalking, which I'm calling it at the moment, is virtually identical to the Zersetzung, which was I think the procedures developed by the Stasi, which is the East German police, if I'm correct. But the methods and the procedures have all been meticulously documented by these groups. So again, it's important to bring people back to focusing on facts and documentary evidence before dismissing this out of hand as nonsense, because to dismiss something out of hand without researching the evidence is the nonsense. Right. I also wanted to point to the definition of delusion in the DSM-5 manual. And I'm sure I'd be very interested to see if there would be any sort of hasty re-evaluations or reclassifications of this definition. But at the moment, when I started writing this, the DSM-5 manual described schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. They said, this is to them, quote, "Delusions are fixed beliefs that are not amenable to change in light of conflicting evidence. Delusions are deemed bizarre if they are clearly implausible and not understandable to sane culture peers and do not derive from ordinary life experiences." Then they go on, the distinction between a delusion and a strongly held idea is sometimes difficult to make and depends in part on the degree of conviction with which the belief is held, despite clear or reasonable contradictory evidence regarding its veracity. So, this definition suggests that people who can't change their beliefs when they are presented with adequate information to the contrary are delusional. Now, it's important to point out that when we are alleging that we are victims of organised stalking, nobody is bringing out any evidence that is contrary to our case to prove that we are not making sense, that we are saying things that are not true. There has been no evidence or anything brought forward by anyone ever to show that organised stalking is not true or taking place. You can't paper over the persecution of Falun Gong with one pressurised journalist who's written one measly article. That's not bringing evidence to say that this isn't taking place. That's absolutely ridiculous, So, on the contrary, history shows that organised stalking does take place because it has taken place. Of course, it is part of our ordinary life experiences. To suggest that criminal activity is taking place is not an implausible claim. How could it be? We have police service and international security agencies to stop criminal activity. What we are doing is we are bringing clear evidence to people who are denying this, and they are refusing to change their opinions in the face of clear evidence, in the face of the proven evidence of Zesetstang and MKUltra. It just is impossible to suggest that people who are alleging this crime are delusional. So, it is really important for people to take into account the mental state, not of the people who are saying they are victims, but the mental states of the people who are doing this. There are so many aggressive and violent people who commit degenerate acts, as well as corrupt abuses of official power. Far from this being a suspicion, we have numerous convictions and scandals proving this to be the case. So, in terms of the psychiatric assessments that have been taking place, again, none of these psychiatrists have conducted any investigation into the criminal allegations. Of course that they couldn't have done so because the police have never conducted any investigation into these criminal allegations. So on what basis, what logical basis could a psychiatrist be saying that they are presenting clear, contradictory information that proves the person's delusion is not true? None. Okay, so now I'm going to read out a few of the examples from history, factual, it's already happened, where people who have been abused and victims have been deliberately labelled as having a mental illness in the past. In the 1970s, for example, the wife of the US Attorney General was diagnosed with a paranoid mental disorder for claiming that the Nixon administration had been engaged in illegal activities. Many of her claims were later proved as correct, and the term Martha Mitchell effect was coined to describe mental health diagnoses or mental health misdiagnoses when accurate claims are being deliberately dismissed as delusional. The false diagnosis of people was a routine technique of the Soviet era, and they said that all political dissidents had a mental illness. I've also mentioned that China and the Communist Party have said that people who practice Falun Gong are mentally ill. And also people who complain about injustices committed by their local authorities. They have also been labelled as mentally ill. There were some former National Security Agencies, NSA employees, who went to the media in 2006, and they were labelled delusional or paranoid. I have not investigated this story myself enough, but yes, I mean, I am aware. I'm aware of some who are definitely true. Yeah. There's also evidence of money laundering, and somebody at a bank in Germany, and they were dismissed as delusional when the accuser of the somebody who whistleblew was diagnosed. Yeah, that's also happened. I think in the person with NSA's case as well, that they decided to whistleblow, and then they were immediately labelled as psychotic and delusional. And it also happened in the NHS. I found on the line somebody called Kate. She had reported failings in the Care Quality Commission, and they basically suggested that she had a mental illness. I'm also going to remember, because look, if you're going to do something extreme as this to somebody, you're going to need to have prepared an alternative explanation when, people start turning around and asking questions. And this is what they have done with the mental health label, so they can simply just, factory line the cases that should be going investigated through the police through the mental health label. They have set up this bin, or the mental health bin, where they can throw people, into the abyss, and all they do is release, pressurize a journalist once every couple of years, and that seems to be enough to outweigh the persecution of Falun Gong. So it just doesn't make sense, and it's got to make sense from now on, you see. Okay. Yeah, another point to really point out is that, because it's not very nice being being attacked and then said that you've got a mental illness, and a lot of people have found that out the hard way. So another point it's really important to know when discussing this mental health diagnosis is the delusional hearing voices syndrome, because it's very easy to get caught up that when you don't know about the technology that exists and we have patents for, the microwave audio hearing technology was patented in the 1950s, which we knew because it's not that it doesn't exist, it's that you don't know about it. These people don't know about it, and therefore they think it doesn't exist, you see. But all you've got to do is you've got to find the information that the patent for the technology exists, and all that assumption, all that illusion, all that fantasy just dissipates, it disappears, isn't it? Because we've got the fact, we've got the patents going back over 70 years ago. But if you don't know that microwave audio technology exists, you're not going to be able to understand the hearing voices phenomenon properly. So when a target or a victim has suggested that they're, hearing things that, being spoken, if you don't know about that technology, the microwave audio hearing technology, you're going to think there must be no other explanation. There must be a mental illness. And this is what we're saying, that no, you've got to know about all the facts. You've got to take into the wider facts into account. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to accurately distinguish between a false hearing voices claim and a real hearing voices claim. You're going to bundle them all together, which is inaccurate. Psychologists should be aware of criminal psychology. They must have done a module at some point in their studies. So even if they're not, specialised in that field, they've got to know that criminal psychology exists. And that's the kind of thing that a criminal or deviant would do. They would try to hide their crime with any lie, that whatever works to hide their crime. And if they have to mimic a mental illness by using technology that nobody's heard about, and you don't know about it, and you're falling for their hook, line and sinker, you will fall for their lie, hook, line and sinker. Because they're going to get away with it, and the victim has to spend all their life getting that evidence together, and that's why, and spending all their time and dedicating their lives to digging themselves out of this hole. But, and one of the holes that we've had to dig ourselves out is the false mental health label. So, yeah. So they seek to do this, to commit this crime in the first place for illegal reasons, but they also seek to do it in a way that avoids detection. Another really important point to mention is that it's very important for people who have been hit with a false mental health label to firstly deal with that, how that has affected you, has affected you emotionally. It's a horrible feeling when somebody even questions your mental health status. But if somebody has actually been hit with a mental health diagnosis, then it's important for you to rebuff and counteract that ridiculous diagnosis with clear evidence of your sanity, and it's very easy to do so. All you do is get on in the front of a smartphone now, and take a video of yourself, and that's a very important way for people to see who you are, and to recognize that you are not speaking incoherently, you are not manifesting, the symptoms. Right, so another point I'd like to mention is that sometimes doctors do get the diagnosis wrong, and that's because they can't imagine deviant psychology. And even though they have studied it, they may be, into mental health psychology, but they are focusing on your mental health rather than the mental health of the perpetrators. And that's really an important shift that I think that we have to be a part of, in that we've got to turn the attention of psychiatry and true psychiatrists to this deviant psychology. And there are, as I've mentioned before, there are a number of branches of that. I'll get into that another time. But that's a really important part of this solution in the long term. Right, so I'll just recap on some of the points that I've noticed in terms of all this problem. It's clear that the doctors and psychiatrists haven't been applying the DSM manual or these when they are suggesting that the victims are delusional, because, as I said, no information contradicting organised stalking has ever been put forward. They've never once checked or verified whether these claims are true, and as such they have formed groundless and factless conclusions. They have formed conclusions regardless of historical evidence. MKUltra was a recent psychology experiment. It was also quite an unusual one. It would be expected of a professional working in the psychology field to have come across that psychology experiment. Again, though, there are no connections being drawn by these psychologists between these victim statements and criminal psychology. The doctors are also demonstrating that they are just not aware of modern technology. But this is not technology about advanced military technology that citizens are not aware of. They're not aware of neuroscience technologies, psychological technologies that they should be aware of. For example, they say that they know about neuroscience and electrical activity in the brain, and they know about brainwave entrainment and electrical stimulation of the brain, and they know about neuropsychiatric effects of radio and microwave frequencies and electromagnetic fields. However, in the same breath, they're suggesting that they've got no idea that the brain could ever be affected by electromagnetic fields emanating from an external source, which would be microwave audio technology. At the same time, they're saying that they've got no idea about affecting the brain with radio and microwave radiation. They've got no idea of the MKUltra psychology experiments, and they've got no idea about criminal sociopathy. Okay, so what I'm saying is, some doctors may just have gone on the wrong path and assumed that, they've believed the hype, and they haven't thought about it deeply enough. But when we do think deeply about it enough, it's very clear who, what is making sense and what isn't. And it's time and time again, what doesn't make sense is the deviant's crime, the deviant's lie, because they are not acting as fully developed human beings. They have not developed certain faculties. They have developed more primitive faculties. So that's all I'm going to say for the time being about the psychological mental health arguments. But please don't be disheartened if that's happened to you. I think it has knocked a couple of people for six. It can be a horrible experience, but And then a lot of people spend a lot of time, fighting to prove that they are innocent and not mentally ill, and they can take it really to heart. Don't take it to heart. It's not your fault. Luckily, we've got truth and justice on our side.